A Burning in New Haven by Brandish Gilhelm.
Chapter 5. Her name was Sarah Westmore. What began as a lovely, quiet, privileged life ended in those blood-curdling screams at the burning post. No swift death, no mercy given. Dear reader, do not turn away from this truth. Her suffering was a thing of legend. Don't turn away from what was done to her. The flesh calving away in that searing heat, her inhales choked with hot cinders, and feet skinless, bones showing bright red just above the coals. But that was the end of her struggle. To understand what happened next, you must know how it began. Westmore is a name as old as Nordheim itself. Ever has that family blazed the frontier on endless pines in the very heart of that wooded nation. They earned fortune and influence through hard work, timbering, carpentry, shipbuilding, and holding the borders at broken rocks. By their blood was this central territory of Nordheim made great. In recent times, this mighty house was held by a great baron, Alphys Westmore. Unlike many barons of Nordheim, he was loyal to Henrik the Hawk, and held strong the north in the name of the good king of Grey. For this he was hated by some and adored by others, but always just and simple was his rule, and it endured. And so it was for a score of years. Even when Akram fell, the house Westmore held its doors, a family of old stout blood that would not break. To Alphys and his wife Thea were born no children. Alphys had one brother, though, Skell, and he had 3 lovely daughters. The Baron's oldest niece was the only heir. Many times in the Westmore line had a woman ruled, though, and it was a good omen of mighty times. And so she was brought to Alphys Manor, in those days called Blackfeather Hall, and her name was Sarah. In the high marble rooms of Blackfeather was she brought up as a warrior, as a scholar, as a leader. All the wonders of Alfheim were made available to her. She trained in the sword, the spell, and even the pen, and no one adored her more than Alphys himself, who took her under his wing and lost himself in the gardens with her each day, dreaming of battles and adventures to come. Made defiant and powerful by the shipping lanes along the north coast, though, Nordheim has seldom been a peaceful kingdom. Independent city-states like New Haven made examples of those loyal to Grey, and the snow orcs of Broken Rocks raided and pushed their borders every few years. Dangerous times loomed. For a few short years, though, Alphys and Sarah knew true friendship and loved one another as uncle and niece only can. Then one day, on the autumn of Sarah's 11th birthday, Alphys Westmore, baron of the mightiest family in Nordheim, disappeared. To find him poisoned or killed by a thieve's dagger would have been less terrible, for he simply vanished. All the houses of Westmore rallied, searched, interrogated, tracked, and nothing. It was as if the stars had opened up and swallowed him whole. Sarah wanted nothing of her inheritance or her title. She wanted nothing of life itself, truly, once Alphys had vanished. Had he abandoned her? Become tired of her affection? Or of teaching her all the world had to know? Had he been taken or killed? The questions circled again and again and drove her a bit mad and into a despair far beyond her few years. The seasons rose and fell. Feeling only dread in Blackfeather's high walls, Sarah took all she had learned, that fierce independence that was her birthright, and she vanished into the pine ocean of Nordheim. So tragedy fell on that great house, for their baron vanished, and their heir was in self-exile. Sadly, while Sarah wandered the wilderness, the calamities only continued. Blackfeather Hall burned to the ground, with no explanation. Snow orcs raided and destroyed the southern manors of Duke Scott, and even Alphys's brother Skell came to dark times and was taken prisoner by Ket mercenaries. It seemed all was lost for family Westmore. Then, when the ashes were cooling of that terrible time, Sarah returned. She was no longer a simple girl, Mud-caked in dark leather boots and green wool cloak walked she from those woods. She carried longbow and feather-fletched darts, a bronze-tipped spear, hunter's rope, and a bulky satchel of pelts. She was like a feral child or a mountain man, out of place in the small villages west of Haven, and dark as pitch were her eyes. Those who crossed her met terrible deaths, and one story holds that she killed an entire legion of goat-helmed guards at Granite Ford, but no bodies were ever recovered. On all who pursued her she laid doom, and left in her wake glyphs and folding circles in the dirt. Somewhere out there in the forest, where few can even survive, she had become a powerful thing. A witch. On this descended all the military power of Duke Harold, the Lord of New Haven. He was known through the north as a hunter of witches, a zealot of Udin's ascetic sect. Claiming God's hand, he jailed and tortured and burned who he chose, and Sarah was the next soul in his sights. Exactly how she came into his cruel custody is lost to time. One yarn claims he brought a division of cavalry down on her in ambush, while another version describes him besting the girl in a dramatic duel of single combat. Now, this is nonsense, for any who know Duke Harold, and they were few, knew that he was a frail man with courage of a river snake. Either way, the house of Westmore had fallen. Sarah was taken and bound, and the darkness gathered. Some even say she let herself be caught, overtaken with gloom, or plotting some Gordian revenge. Yes, if you see a hidden pattern here, then the sages agree. Not mere chance was this age of ill luck for her kin, for the Westmores were the only true rivals of Duke Harold and his witch-hunting council. With them out of the way, he could expand his campaign of terror to all of Nordheim, perhaps even take the wealthy sister towns of Shipshelm and Gilhelm, where all the treasures of the sea were laid. But before this dire plan could take full form, whatever that was to be, that grim day in New Haven had to pass. Sarah was burned alive. Governor Crogay was dead, and 2 rogues from the Jagged Shore had stolen away with the girl. Nuisances to be dealt with in the hideous steel gears of Duke Harold's master plan, but little more than nuisances. He would cleanse all the land of witchcraft, claim lordship over the Northlands, and then make his final move to dominate Shipshelm. There was only one loose end he had not anticipated. Chain had escaped from his pit at Arleston Crossroads. This seemed an unrelated and irrelevant fiasco until the day Sarah was burned. Harold was a vicious, merciless man, and so moved to end this debacle with a decisive strike. Empty-made were the barracks of New Haven, and from the south charged a division of high-helmed spearmen from Arleston. They closed in on Elm Hill, and the 3 meddlers had no hope. Despite the military facts of this battle, which any fool could assess in a glance, the unlikely 3 refused to back down from that immense force. They stood tall by the humble grave of the heir of Westmore. And this is what happened on Elm Hill, as best this humble bard can tell. Chain had little care for tactics or strategy. He fought like a lion, and killed what came. Vigg and Drum, mere mortals next to Chain's incredible bulk, had no such luxury. "We'll be crushed to jelly," Vigg called to Drum. "This escalation is madness. Up, old friend, up or we'll be speared." Drum took the order, scrambling up the ancient trunk like a ferret. He trailed arrows in a mess like a molting hen, but climbed fast. Vigg was a few legs up the branches already, throwing daggers in each hand. The little dirks seemed comical and ridiculous as the ground thundered with steel and horses. "Men of Nordheim, stay your charge!" Drum at least gave it a try, but the noise drowned him out, and then they saw the crossbows fire. From downslope, back towards town, came a hail of darts, 80 or more of them, floating up in an arc, up to a zenith pause. And then whistling down. Drum, with incredible skill, shot 3 or more of the bolts right from the air with his own crossbow, and this spared his friend Vigg, but 2 projectiles hit Drum in the shoulder and thigh. Chain was like a 12-foot cactus, bristling with darts that barely pierced his hide but stuck. They had survived the opening volley, and Chain's anger was stirred. Drum unleashed arrow after arrow, made even deadlier by Vigg's knives. They attacked in all directions as the cavalry closed, and the siege spears came bobbing up from the south. Men fell, but there were simply too many. It mattered not, for then Chain entered the fray. First, the giant turned his fists to the mounted knights. He grabbed one steed by the throat, throwing the rider bodily, and braced his great bare foot against a stone. This formed a sort of wall that sent 3 more horses crumbling into a mess, one man dying on his own shield as it caught his throat. The horse then Chain spun as a weapon, swinging it by the neck with a howl and crushing 6 other riders. Again he roared. His back was to the little grave, and no less than 5 pikes had pierced him fully through. The beast of Arleston abandoned his post, and then charged forward. The crossbowmen were unprepared for this foe, and he simply trampled them. Death screams were everywhere. Chain turned, took one great breath, and sprinted straight toward the old elm. For a tiny second, his furious eyes met Drum's, and a signal was there given. "Up! Up!" Drum yelled. And they scrambled, barely avoiding the battle ram of Chain's shoulder, which tore right through the mighty trunk. Exploding in splinters and broken boughs, the beast was unhalted, and on his shoulder he pushed a ruin of wood as a crude shield. The 2 men above him came tumbling down in a crackling mess of branches, and the charge of Arleston's spears was a confused tangle. The spearmen were not done fighting. One pinned Vigg to the ground as his cohort knocked the man unconscious with a spiked mace. Before Drum could help, though, his injured thigh was torn open by a jabbing pike. He whirled, killing his attacker, but felled by a flail that swung from nowhere. The little archer's head hit the earth with a thud. Through his blurry eyes, darkening, Drum saw Chain fight on. He had a handful of spears, thrusting and swinging wildly, killing dozens with his frenzy. His black blood was everywhere. The spearmen paused, reformed, then feinted the giant with a rush of 8 men. This they used to then jump from behind, stabbing and slashing for a weak point that seemed non-existent.
Die!
Chain howled, crushing a man's skull like an orange in one hand while spinning on the ball of one huge foot, sweeping the legs out from under another group of attackers. And then the surviving crossbowmen rallied. Another round of bolts hit Chain. One of those godless dogs must have trained better than the others, for his dart pierced Chain's eye with deadly precision. Still, the beast of Arleston was unfazed. He fought on and on and on, crushing men with the tree trunk, leaping, smashing. But his breath became labored. His eyes dimmed with blood. One cavalryman from New Haven regained his mount, half-shield back on one arm, and he ran past the giant, bracing with all his might. The shield contacted Chain's skull with a metal crack. The rider was thrown from his saddle, arm broken, shield crumpled, but still the blow met its mark. Chain was spun, neck all wrong, and to one knee he went. A spear flew in from his left, pinning his arm to the ground like a bug on a dissection table, and then another, and another. And still there was a reserve of 10 men to move in with bonds and clubs, beating and grappling the behemoth at last. When they all had gone, dragging away Chain and Vigg and Drum in crude rope nets, behind what horses remained. Gathered the dead did they, and bundled steel and wood for reuse, and then the hill once again grew quiet. What was left of the old elm was there like a jagged monument to the battle, and it still stands there to this day. Boom! Boom! Again! Boom! And then a rumble. Drum, time's up, lad. Open your eyes, man. It was Vigg's voice. Drum stirred, aching terribly. Bandaged, but pale from blood loss. A number of days had passed. He was hungry. Above all those pains, hungry. Here, Vigg said, handing him a clump of peppered venison and day-old bread crust. 8, and fast, I think it's starting. Drum tried to make sense, but his mind was in the food. He ate in a frenzy like a starving wolf, finally cracking his knuckles and looking up at Vigg, who was standing over him. Yep, you're still alive, old stump. Vigg extended a hand. The walls, or were they bars, around them shook. Something was roaring above them. Drum gained his feet. His wounds had been tended, but his gear was gone. All he had left was a scale vest, boots, and trousers. Vigg was the same. And then Drum saw Chain. He took up the entire view, a huge hulking form, and he looked stone-cold dead. Is he? No, just resting. We've been put to the games. Games? Duke Harold means to make sport of our deaths, not just let us die on Elm Hill for a girl we never met. Vigg scowled at Drum, but it was just a humorous jab. They both smiled, but it hurt to do so. So what's the plan? Drum asked. Vigg laughed out loud and Chain stirred. His eye opened slightly, the left one bandaged and caked in dried blood. He, or it, did not look pleased. We've been moved up to the top cell. We're next. Drum scanned the scene at last beyond Chain. A series of barred cells was housed in a low-ceilinged corridor. None of it looked beyond Chain's ability to destroy. Drum had little to lose, so he stood, took one painful step on a bruised, stitched thigh, and poked the giant in the ribs. Hey, big guy, he squeaked, losing his nerve. Get us out of here, would you? No response. And so the next moments passed, and worry took hold on our heroes. What they could not have known is what was going on in the giant's tortured mind. Not the pain of defeat or the fear of death. Chain, the champion of Arleston, was in a waking nightmare. Her name was Sarah. That much he remembered. Her lovely face danced across his mind and then spoke to him. The voice echoed and reversed and held a demonic tenor. He tried to shake the sound away, but the voice intensified. It took on his own growling voice and spoke both parts in a dreamlike conversation. Chain. We must fight. We're one now, my old friend. My only friend.
You are not real. You are dead.
Dead, yes. But real as ever.
Quiet.
My powers are many, beast of the crossroads. I am real, I assure you. I am here, now.
Chain.
What's that?
My name is Chain.
Yes. Yes, of course it is. The destroyer, the grand victor. Then rise, Chain, and ready yourself.
Not real. Get out of my head.
I can't leave you. Not now. Not ever. We're one. And there's much to do.
Quiet!
This Chain yelled out loud, not just in his mind's voice, and Drum jumped back like a frightened finch. Vigg only huffed, eyes fixed on the spike gates ahead, counting the seconds. Boom! It came again, and a roar. Boom! 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 It was getting louder. Then cheers and yells echoed down and through the corridor. Time to wake up, my giant friend. Beast, or whatever you're called. We're about to die. Vigg rubbed his fists.
Chain.
Vigg mumbled, not even looking. And then down below his voice, down from the darkness in his anger, down from the confusion, the grief, the frustration of his monster mind, the beast of Arleston grumbled,
My name is Chain.
The muttering was cut short. Then a roar from the crowd. They slammed the bleachers with their boots, howled for blood, and it was deafening. Then a metallic clunk, a sliding of rope and stone in their cage filled with spear tips. The whole structure slid forward, and as they were pushed, the great massive spike gates swung open with a grinding of iron hinges. The roar of the crowd grew even louder. They were chanting, and at the arena's center a man with braids and striped pantaloons egged them on with raucous gestures. Beast! 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 At one end of the arena, a series of red banners draped by the elite. They were pale elves, men with golden cloaks, women writhing and cooing, and Duke Harold himself at the fore, gloating over the whole scene in a tall black hat. His satisfaction was sick and narrow-eyed. He was ready to savor the blood to come. Beast! 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 The three of them were prodded out into the arena, to arm's length of the crier. The fool thought himself safe from the slayer of Arlston, or was too dumb to notice how close the giant had come. Beast! 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 Suddenly the Titan awoke, his one eye flickering open, his inner torment gone. He reached one iron hand out, grabbed the crier about his waist, paused, and crushed him. The poor soul was pulped in an instant. The crowd hushed, and the beast of Arlston had run out of patience.
My name is Chain.
The crowd roared with terrified approval, and gates at every side slid open. The arena was a circle with 20-foot walls and a great smoldering fire pit at center. Drum and Vigg cowered by their massive ally, with no idea what to do next. And then the monsters were loosed, and the battle began. Chapter 6. From 6 iron gates they came bounding. The smoke of the central pyre whipped and coiled with the speed of their rushing assault. These creatures were pitch black, with skin that seemed to eat the light around it. They were panther-like in shape, but maned with a great mantle of razor-sharp spines, each as long as a man's arm. 4 narrow eyes, intense with predatory fury, spread across the shadowy skull, and their tails were twice the length of a great cat, twisting and thrashing as they rushed across the arena. Shadow Lashers. These were the war beasts kept by snow orcs at Broken Rocks, the magic guard dogs of the Sandmancers of Deepest Cath. They were known to dwell in wild packs in the high fells near Thumush, and ranged as far east as the murk of Dur Olo. These were the worst of their kind, though, for they had been kept in cages, and no wild animal can abide captivity. And so when they were released, their first and only thought was blood. Chain, Drum, and Vigg all caught their toes, seeing the Hellions approach. "We've survived worse, old stump. Let's bait him in." Vigg crouched, ready to spring to one side. Behind him, Drum made ready for the opposite maneuver. They hoped to baffle the things, and then fight bare-handed in the scuffle. Chain simply waited, cracking his massive knuckles. In seconds, the Lashers were there, black fangs flying past them. They darted side to side, confusing the charge and barely avoiding the razor-tipped tails. Chain caught one of them by the scruff, which cut him terribly. Regardless, the giant lifted the animal with one huge hand and hurled it to one side. Against the high mason wall, it hit with a wet crack and never moved again. "Just keep your toes, lad. Our big friend will take care of this." Vigg and Drum continued their deadly game, dancing whenever the Lashers came rushing past. Each of them had a score tiny cuts. They were still weary and sore from Elm Hill, but with Chain at their side, the battle was all but won. Another Lasher ripped by, 1 second in front, then behind, and a great red spray erupted from Vigg's forearm in terrible slow motion. Gyah! Chain spun, bracing himself with one hand on the dirt, and then shot out his other like a battle ram. Open-palmed, he crushed a Lasher's skull back into its spine with a howl, and then closed his mighty fingers and finished it. 4 remained, and they began to circle, more wary than before. "Finish it, Chain!" Drum yelled, seeing hope in it all. But then things took a dark turn. Chain, the Indomitable, let fall his mighty arms at his sides. His face, crumpled with battle fury, went slack. His one good eye drooped open in a sort of trance or daze, and he wavered side to side like a drunk. After a weird moment, the Lashers preparing to pounce, he spoke.
Where am I?
The voice was a warped hybrid of voices. Sorcery crackled in the air. "Chain, old boy," Vigg answered, never taking his eyes off the predators. "Now is no time to go slack on us, man. Snap out of it."
Where am I?
The voice came again. Chain looked at his own massive forearms, down at his heaving greenish chest. His slack expression changed to horror, and then panic. The crowd was confused, but the lashers saw their chance. Forward came the ebon killers, flying at the trio. Drum was in a death-defying display, rolled under one of them, and then he grabbed its flapping razor spine with a bloody hand and pulled. The beast caromed face first into the dirt. There, the short archer twisted it around in a sort of a chokehold. The spines were all around him, but he held, showing his teeth with strain. Meanwhile, the other three piled onto Chain, who seemed clumsy, unsure, even afraid. The giant brushed at the lashers like a child frightened of spiders and backed away as they all fell from his bulk.
What
is this? Where am I? The voice came again, and Vigg saw fear and confusion in that one eye that sent a shudder of fear down his back. But before the lashers could come again, or Drum crack his quarry's neck, Chain's panic turned to determination. One great hand he raised like an Aphosian statue. He opened the great fingers wide and spoke some hideous arcane words that mortal men should never hear. Arcan nodari transarum sanctus. The great hand descended, hitting the ground flat. From this point, a circle of gleaming green light emanated, engulfing Drum, Vigg, Chain, and the struggling lasher. The circle wheeled and spun with concentric lines and trapezoidal glyphs, growing brighter and brighter. The whispers of demons were on the air in that crackling second. And then they vanished.